Dan? Perfect. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Jimmy Midget, and I am here alongside Dan Merkin, and we are going to have a quick training this afternoon, take about an hour or so, to talk about how to advocate for LGBTQIA students in the legislature and potentially in our local school boards. On the screen now is the agenda for today. This is the welcome section, so I'm welcoming you. We have a number of great folks who helped us put this together today, including Dan Merkin, who's the Director of Policy at JASMYN, Cindy Watson, the CEO of JASMYN, our friend Manny from UNF, LGBTQ Center, and from PFLAG, both Cindy Noble's the president and Jonathan Stem, the vice president. We've all put together, and we've all been working this week to get this together for you all and for us, for our whole community. So thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have you all. Today, if you go to the next slide, Dan, we're going to do a few things. We are going to provide some practical information and approaches to assist your efforts to make positive change for the LGBTQIA plus community. We're going to learn about the two current bills. There are more than two, but the two that are most dangerous to us, the two current bills affecting the LGBTQIA community. Talk a little bit about how to use your voice to tell your own stories, sue these legislators to hopefully pierce their hearts and make them a little more receptive to our message and to the needs of our young people. And we'll give you some steps to empower yourself into this action. So that's what we're talking about. And if we all agree to that, we're going to jump on in to the current bills. So as I mentioned, there are two of them that have come forward in this current legislative session, which I'll tell you all, as a legislative advocate for many years, this is a very challenging time in Tallahassee. We have the first bad bill that I want to talk to you about is what's been called HB or House Bill 1557. It's got a Senate bill number of 1834. We have called it the Don't Say Gay or Trans Bill. And it is a bill that is cruising through the House of Representatives, the Florida House. It's been to three committees in the House, and each time it was voted out on a completely partisan basis. And so far it has been through one Senate committee. What this bill does, according to its sponsor, is to ensure that parents and guardians of students are never kept in the dark about a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. And it establishes procedures at the Florida Department of Education to force compliance by school districts with that. So what that means, breaking it down, is classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Those are lines 97 through 101 of the House version of the bill, which I think is identical to the Senate version still. So what that means is that teachers, school districts could be held liable if they have instruction that has to do with topics related to sexual orientation or gender identity. And while the sponsors pretend this relates only to classroom lessons for K through 3 students, the sponsors have admitted that that or clause, that or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards, could apply beyond 3rd grade. And knowing what we know right now about the Florida Department of Education and the folks in charge of it right now, I think they'll be looking for any opportunity that they can find to have this provision grow, if you will. If you could hit the next slide, Dan. The second bill, in some ways, they're both bad. They're both awful. This is just as bad. And some of you who I recognize on the screen who have done some diversity work will know immediately why this is so disastrous for what we do. But this is called the so-called Stop Woke Act. That woke there is an acronym. I can't remember what it means. The governor came up with it, so we'll let it lay where it is. This bill is House Bill number 7 and Senate Bill 148. And for those of us who've done a little legislative work, what you should know is that a low number on the House bill number, and it's only number 7 out of however many hundreds there are, that means that it's a priority for House leadership at least. So what the Stop Woke Act would do is for public education K through 20, that means K through 12 plus college, right? It seeks to prevent critical race theory from being taught in any of these schools or classrooms, although there is no Florida school that has ever taught what is really CRT. The bill requires that instruction on required topics must be factual and objective, no argument there, and may not suppress or distort significant historical events, such as the Holocaust, slavery, the Civil War and Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, and the contributions of women, African American, and Hispanic people to our country. Instruction may not utilize material from the 1619 Project and may not define American history as something other than the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. Students learning about these topics then cannot be made to feel bad about history based on the student's race, color, sex, or national origin. It also includes a provision in terms of sex ed for students in grades 6 through 12. It cements and affirms that sex ed in those grades must show an awareness of the benefits of sexual abstinence as the expected standard. And that varies throughout Florida, how individual school districts have dealt with that. And that's all I'll say about that. If you'll go to the next slide, there's a few more things that this particular bill does. The Stop Woke Act also applies not only in K through 20 education, but also in employment. And in the employment realm, the bill specifies that subjecting any individual as a condition of their employment to training, instruction, or other required activity that espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates, or compels such individuals to believe certain divisive concepts. Now, what are the divisive concepts? That's really what I talk about in the next bullet point. Employment diversity programs cannot teach that an individual, by virtue of his or her race, sex, or national origin, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. So we all know what those words mean. It's pretty clear what they're up to. Also, continues the bill, that such virtues as merit, excellence, hard work, fairness, neutrality, objectivity, and racial color blindness are racist or sexist, or were created by members of a particular race, color, sex, or national origin to oppress members of another race, color, sex, or national origin. So what does that really mean? Think about it the way that the folks who wrote these bills think about it. They don't want people to feel guilty based on their race. They don't want people to feel guilty based on their sex or their gender. That's fine. I don't want people to feel guilty for that either. But the reality is that these are extremely subjective terms, and having these terms in the law could lead to any number of unintended or perhaps intended consequences. And both for the K through 20 and employment context, this bill would create new legal causes of action. That's a fancy lawyer way of saying new ways to file a lawsuit that will make suing for the supposed violations of the bill extremely easy, too easy, in fact. So we do have a little bit of talking points, and I'm going to run through these kind of quickly because I think Dan will pick up some of this as he talks in the next section. But on Don't Say Gay or Trans, we're making it very clear that this legislation is meant to stigmatize LGBTQIA people, to isolate LGBTQIA kids, and make teachers fearful of providing a safe, inclusive classroom. The existence of LGBTQIA students and parents is not a taboo topic. that has to be relegated to silence or regulated by the Florida Legislature. We're here. Our humanity is intact. There's no reason to do this to our community. Another talking point is that it's impossible to teach a complete history of the United States and Florida without reference to LGBTQIA people. Students themselves come from diverse families. Projects in class that refer to family makeup could stigmatize LGBTQIA students or students with parents who are in our community. There are no standards within the bill language or any other statute that would be a guide for teachers in school districts. The Florida Department of Education is hostile to LGBTQIA students based on their own recent actions. And by that I refer to the Florida Department of Education recently took down a bullying or anti-bullying resource webpage as part of the State Department of Education website that provided anti-bullying information, and they scrubbed it of anti-bullying information that was helpful and supportive to LGBTQ students. And then they put it back up without any references to us. Whenever we know that LGBTQIA students are at tremendous risk for being bullied, not only by their classmates, but also by their legislature. School districts can be sued by parents based entirely on this subjective criteria that is not explained in the bill. Public schools will have to spend scarce education dollars to pay for special magistrates, that cost goes on to the school district, and untold insurance and litigation costs related to these baseless lawsuits. Going to the next set of little talking points here on Don't Say Gay and Trans. This bill will have devastating real world consequences, especially for LGBTQIA youth who are already experiencing higher rates of bullying and suicide. Lawmakers should be providing more support for these students instead of trying to force LGBTQIA students back into the closet by policing identity or stopping kids from talking about their same-sex parents. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Participation in sex ed is already regulated and requires parental notification. Sexual orientation and gender identity are not about sex, and they should not be treated like something negative to be stigmatized so directly by this bill. There are serious equal protection concerns related specifically to labeling sexual orientation and gender identity as problematic or banned topics. This invites even more litigation and will waste state public dollars on unnecessary litigation, no question about it. So those are two pages of talking points on Don't Say Gay or Trans. One page of talking points on Stop Woke Act. There's a lot more in the press, but this is what I would like for you all to kind of focus on as you think about this. Teachers are already overburdened. We know this. And now they must plan lessons and instruct based on subjective emotions of their students, which could be completely unknown to the teacher. Lessons on slavery could violate the law if white children feel bad about the way Black Americans arrived in colonial America. Lessons on the Holocaust could make students of German descent or actual neo-Nazis. I know we have a few of those around Florida. Students who are neo-Nazis, it may make them feel bad about their heritage and their beliefs, thus violating the Stop Woke Act. This act would censor conversations about racism, discrimination, and injustice, allowing people to sue for discrimination if they're made to feel guilty or made to feel discomfort because of a training or school lesson. At work, this gives employees the right to sue their employer for discrimination if the trainings cover implicit bias, racial equity, and even sexual harassment that would cause them discomfort. Imagine, I shouldn't do examples on the fly, but I heard this a little bit in Tallahassee. Imagine, you have someone who is required to take a sexual harassment class, sensitivity class, and they themselves are a misogynist who doesn't really value women. If they're willing to be honest about that in court, they could sue their employer and get $10,000 just because the employer made them feel bad for being a misogynist. It's upside down. The bill would let me try that again. The bill would pervert the intent of Florida's Civil Rights Act causing companies, schools, and agencies statewide to avoid having these conversations at all, and in order to avoid legal liability. Already, Osceola County Schools canceled a civil rights history seminar for the fear that the content could be viewed as critical race theory, just by that potential. So I just bring all this up as ideas to think about why these bills are so dangerous for Florida. And I think with that, I get to stop talking for a little while, and you get to take a little breather from listening to me. And Dan Merkin, the Director of Policy at JASMYN, is going to say a few things.
Hi, everybody. Well, thanks, Jimmy, for telling us all about the bad bills. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about it. So this is some ideas that people can use to kind of reflect and start to craft their own stories and ways to tell them to legislatures. If we were in a small group, we might try breaking this out and doing this in breakout sessions, but we don't really have the capacity to do that today. But just think about these things. So just in a few words, after all you've heard, describe how these bills most personally affect you. Jot that down, put that down in a few words for yourself, because when we come to some of these next exercises, those are going to be really, really helpful for things that you can do when communicating with the legislature. If you have any actual, or do you have any actual experience with the schools that will be impacted? So remember your role. I mean, do you have a student? Are you a parent of a student? What is the impact it's going to have on you in everyday life if these bills get enacted? How would these bills impact your feelings of safety or harm for yourself or the larger community? Obviously, the implications for these bills are pretty horrific if they were to pass and be enforced as they are written. So we all know from personal experience that, when these things been done in the past, and they passed marriage bans and other things that specifically target our community, it has a harmful and psychological impact. And so people can speak to what that would be. So I have someone in the waiting room, Jimmy. I'm going to move to the next slide. So here are some things to be mindful of when we are going to tell our stories to our legislatures. And this could be actually tell them in person or in writing or, through other mediums. So we're just going to remember to do these things. Always be friendly and respectful of your elected officials. That's a place to start with. If you come in at a meeting with somebody and you're angry and grumpy, that's going to put their defense mechanisms up automatically, and they're going to shut down and not hear a thing you say. I'm not, really, we're sort of exaggerating, but it's not, it's just human nature. Elected officials are people just like you, but they have the ability to impact more directly through legislation and influence things that you care about. So again, treat them as you would want to be treated, even if you may disagree with them on issues. And that's another bullet point up here. It's important to build relationships with your elected officials over time. So a good strategy is to build the relationships with them before they even get elected. And we've done that successfully with some people, but unfortunately, most of the folks, you haven't had that opportunity. So just remember, it's like building a relationship. You got to go in and do all the nice things, like going out on a first date. You got to be, kind and gentle, and and try and put your best foot forward. Frame your proposed change and try and show the upside of why it's, and in these cases, these are kind of negative bills, but frame what's positive about what things are currently like. It's like, hey, right now without these laws, we're able to do this. These are very important things. If you do this, you can also put down the downside, which is the stick, and say, hey, these are all the terrible things that could possibly happen if you pass these bills. Know the legislature you're going to approach. Know their party affiliation, know a little bit about their background, know if they have kids, get to know them a little bit at that level, and know the things that they care about. If you know a little bit about a legislature and that they have an interest in, they may be Republican, but maybe they're also really into supporting safety in schools. Maybe that's an issue they've worked on. Well, then if you frame it that way, that they would probably give you more or maybe it's somebody that's really somebody who wants to recruit businesses to the state of Florida. And that's their big thing as a Republican. And you want to go talk to them, it's like, well, this is what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to draw these businesses here if you pass these bills because they're going to be also afraid of getting sued. It's going to cost them millions to billions of dollars in litigation, and they're not going to want to move here. So know that who you're talking to and which talking points might resonate with them the best. Be consistent and stay on your talking points and your message. Don't seek to change who you are, and own what you are saying. Be the change that you seek. And finally, it says squeak, don't shout. So the greasy wheel gets the oil. So be consistent. It's okay to contact your legislature regularly, but just do it in a calm and professional sort of way. You don't want to be yelling at anybody.
That's right. Thanks, Dan. I'll jump back in for a few minutes and then I'll hand back off to you very shortly. Thanks, Dan. So in terms of taking action, so Dan gave us a great outline of how, the 30,000-foot view of how this works. But we want to talk a little bit about lobbying versus grassroots advocacy. Lobbying is something that is done, to encourage the passage or defeat of a bill. It's typically not able to be, direct lobbying is not typically able to be done by those who are working for a nonprofit or perhaps a government entity in the name of that nonprofit or government entity. But go ahead, Dan. I know you've given this a little more thought than I have.
Yeah, so one of the things, Jimmy's going to drop the link in here. There's a little write-up. We get these questions a lot about in this nonprofit versus question, what can people actually do? So lobbying is basically defined as a direct action to directly influence the legislature or legislator around a specific bill, okay? Whereas grassroots advocacy, it's more trying to influence the people around you to contact that legislature or to educate in a more indirect way, or not necessarily around a bill, but around concepts and different things that could potentially come up for legislation. A lot of nonprofits are worried that, that they can't do some of these activities, but, according to IRS rules, a 501c3 nonprofit is able to speak out on issues. They can't do any candidate work, but they can speak out on issues. So they can't say vote for this person or that person, or this person's better or that person's better. But they can certainly, on issues like this, contact their legislator and tell them how these things would impact their people. It just has to be that it can't be a substantial amount of their budget. So, if this is something you do once a year during the legislative time and you're doing a little of it, it's not something that you're against. But if you are worried that it's going to come up to a certain limit, you can always do an election H for your 501c3. And if you really want to do this more all the time, consider starting a 501c4, and that's a way that you can do more of this legislation stuff. So we have two ways that we can work. We're going to be talking about today about how to reach your elected officials. So some of this is direct contact, and others are grassroots efforts to influence. And you as an individual can do any of these things at any time. It only applies if you're representing an organization that you may have limits, okay? So we're gonna be talking a little bit about some tools that are available to us to email, call, write, and I'm gonna be showing you these as we go along, all right? And then also under the grassroots, we're gonna be talking about social media strategies, ways to text, email your family, friends, organizations, et cetera, letters to the editor, putting out press releases from your organization about how you feel about a particular position on this bill or these bills, and of course, offering to tell your story to the press. So let's go into that. So I'm going to advance the slide here if it lets me. All right, so the first thing I want you to be aware of is email tree, okay? So Equality Florida, one of our partners in the Coalition for Equality, has right now a link tree put together. If you want to, Jimmy, if you could drop that link tree in the chat. Just want people to know this is there. At the end of the presentation, we're going to send this out so that everyone will have access to all these links and they can access these tools. So this is going to be something that anybody can use, and it's going to be a great thing. So in the link tree, there's links to 5 separate things, and I've highlighted a couple of them here. And this is something that each of us can do right now if we wanted to while I'm talking. So the first one is generate a response to oppose the Don't Say Gay Trans bill. So if you want to throw that link in there, if people want to click on that, just to see what that looks like, it takes you to an automated page. And if you share this link, this is a link that you can actually share out with people. We'll talk more about strategies of how to do that. The only thing is, if you use this particular link, you are going to get your name sent to Equality Florida, and your name's going to go in their data bank. If you don't feel comfortable with that, we're going to talk about other ways to get your information to the legislatures. But this is a quick and easy way to do that. And it's a tool. I can tell you a lot of organizations that don't have these tools. They're fairly pricey, to buy because they will automatically identify certain legislatures based on your address and all that sort of stuff and help you do that. So everybody, if you want to click on that link and just take a look at that, that's great. The second one is a link to do the same thing for the Stop Woke bill. And that link is now in the chat. So I'm going to encourage everybody just, open those links up, put them in a browser and a tab. And, if you want to do it now, that's great while I'm talking. Or if you want to go ahead and do that at the end of the session, you already have the links open and you can generate an email right then and there. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what to put in the email. Now, Jimmy just went through a whole bunch of different talking points. You can borrow some of those things that were in there, but you really want to personalize your email because the reality is that they get lots and lots of email, and more often than not, they don't have time to read form emails. So if you just use the form and it doesn't have any changes in it, they're not really going to read it. They're just going to mark, yes, this person was for it or this person was against it in their little notebook, and then that's it. So they're not really going to hear your story. But if you personalize it, then they're more likely they're going to read it. All right. Another thing I want people to be aware of is that we have some direct contact tools. So one of the things that's also going on every single day this week and into March, as long as the session's in session till March 11th, they're going to need to generate phone calls. So everybody is encouraged, if they have time, to sign up for a phone bank. So what you'd be doing in these phone banks is that you volunteer your time. And in this case, Equality Florida has lists of identified voters who are known to be pro-equality, and you get put into a phone bank, and the computer system automatically calls using your phone to them. It doesn't show your number or anything. Once you get a hold of a dialer or phone, you actually can talk to this person on the phone, and then you can link them through to the switchboard in Tallahassee, and you can leave messages based on whoever they're targeting that day. So, you can fill up a senator or a representative's voicemail with messages from people in their district about this issue. And you basically, when you get a hold of the person on the phone, you train them a little bit and say, hey, would you leave a message, really simple, here's a 30-second message, could you leave about, this Don't Say Gay bill is really, really bad and it would hurt gay children, et cetera, et cetera. And then you leave the message. And the idea is to just, let every representative know that there are lots and lots of people that are paying attention on this and, filling up their voicemail box to the point where they're going to have a hard time doing anything else other than listening to voicemails from people concerned about this. And then they'll learn that maybe it's probably not a good issue for us to stir people up around. The next thing is a link. If you want to, again, if you want to not go through Equality Florida's contact system, you can go to this link for My Florida House, find your representatives. And if you put in your address, it will tell you who your representatives are from the state level up. So it'll give you your state representatives, your Congress people, and your senators, federal senators, US senators. So in each of those where it shows you, then you can click through and you can actually find their contact information. So it'll have their their telephone number. If you're going to call anybody yourself in Tallahassee, use their Tallahassee number, not their local office number, because they're not in Jacksonville right now, or wherever you may be. They're in Tallahassee, so use the office number there. And that's going to be true until the probably middle of March. And you also can usually go to each representative or senator or state senator has their own page, and you can click through and you can find a form that you can write them directly through. And so that's something that's another option if you want to do it that way. Another way you can get all that contact information for Duval County, I know we may have people on this call that aren't necessarily from Northeast Florida, because the links were sent far and wide for registration. So, but if you're in Duval, there is a link for the Duval delegation, which also can get you all the information you need about your local elected officials. And this is specific to the Duval delegation for anybody that's representing Duval County in the Florida Legislature, so senators and representatives. All right, so here's some other things that we can talk about. One thing is it's really helpful because our representatives gets tons of emails and phone calls. One way to really get their attention is to write a letter. So if you have the opportunity to write a letter full of your feelings and things that you care about regarding what these bills might do, and put your signature on that and send it, and handwritten letters are even the best. Just like sure that your handwriting is legible. That's why I don't do handwritten letters, but different story for a different day. But if you can mail those to them, mail them to them in Tallahassee, that might get something that their legislative aide or whoever's going through the mail might actually say, hey, you got this letter and you really need to read it. Make sure that when you write about why youth deserve, these classrooms where they're free to learn and be who they are, where they're able to ask questions, where they're able to be their authentic selves, talk about things from a perspective of fairness and respect, opportunity, and freedom. Ironically, one of these bills is called the Individual Freedom Bill, the official name for the Stop Woke Act, ironically named. So if you want to remind them of what freedom is really about in your letters, that's not a bad thing. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about opportunities here. There's a link here, Free to Say Gay. There's a couple of advertisements that Quality Florida has put together. These are great things that could be shared on your social media. You could share social media to one of these ads, and then in your comment section, underneath under your Facebook or whatever, you can drop one of those action links to write an email to your legislators. So those are some opportunities there. Another thing that we really need is people to start writing to the bigger community, because another way to influence the legislature is for them to see what people are thinking about in their home communities. And if they're seeing a lot of letters to the editor in the Times-Union or in the Folio or the Resident or the Daily Record or whatever paper they might, the Star, whatever paper they might be reading, it's going to remind them that people are out there that care about this. So here's some tips on how to write a good letter to the editor. Usually this is pretty much the standard across most places that take letters to the editor. So just keep it brief. A lead letter is 350 words. Usually they're looking about 200 words or less. That's not a lot, so you have to be really concise. I prefer, I think letters that tell personal stories or kind of hit at the emotional level are better. Certainly you can put facts and figures in there a little bit, but that's, those aren't real live people in most people's heads, unfortunately. So tell a real story about a real person and how it impacts them, and you'll be better. Your letter to the editor will be better. And of course, there's the information about how to contact our Jacksonville TU letter editor. So that's that. And here's a fun little comment I just wanted to share. Recently, at one of the middle schools, one of the teachers asked a group of students involved with the middle school GSA, what do you think of the Don't Say Gay bill? And we got like 12 really wonderful responses, but this is just one middle schooler, a sixth grader said something along these lines. It's stupid, dumb, discriminating, and hurtful. So these are from the mouths of the young people who actually get impacted. I encourage you to tell those two stories as well. So if you're here as a parent concerned about a young person, your child, hear from them what they're concerned about, what their fears are, and be a good advocate on their behalf and incorporate those into your letters to the editor. And that's another way to kind of like bring it home that these things are really harmful if they were to get passed, and it really does scare young people. So we're sort of at the end of the formal presentation. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for some questions. So if anybody has any specific questions, you can put that information into the chat box. And I'm also going to unmute people so you can ask them, and I'll recognize you for, so raise your hand if you want to ask a question is what I'm saying, and I'll be able to recognize you and unmute you. So I'm going to go change our function here so that you can do that. I'm going to stop sharing. I think that's our last slide. Yep. So hopefully we can all see each other now. Great. And let me go ahead and change the setting here.
Oh yeah, that's a lot better.
Okay. And I think, Jimmy, you already changed it to unmute themselves. Great. So
yeah. So folks can go ahead if you have a question or you want to feedback about the training or ideas that you've had. If you have a better idea on a talking point or just another idea on a talking point, feel free. You can now unmute yourself. If it gets unwieldy, we'll change the way that we're doing it. But for now, anybody with a thought can just rock and roll with it.
Yeah. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I just want to say one other thing we didn't get into, because it's probably, I know for most people, it's unlikely they can travel to Tallahassee to testify in person because it is 2.5 hours away. But there may be some additional hearings that are coming up where that may become an opportunity. So if you're somebody that has the ability to travel, know that they are always looking for people to fill those chambers when certain bills are being discussed in committee. And so you might be able to travel and actually give a 3-minute testimony or 2 minutes that way. And we also need people that can do that at school board meetings. We didn't really get into it, but people in St. Johns County, the school district there, is already using the parental rights bill that was passed last year to justify changing things that would harm LGBT students. And so we're going to probably there, as well as in Duval County, need to recruit people to go to those meetings and testify in person about some of these very same talking points about why it's important to keep young people safe. So, Jimmy, do we have any questions?
And Dan and I recently did that at the Duval County School Board just to sort of show the flag a little bit and remind the school board members that we're here and that we're paying attention as well. We just don't go to every meeting like the other side. One other thing, a common question that we get in a presentation like this, and I'm happy to answer now, is yes, we will send out the PowerPoint. We put it into a PDF, so all of the links today that we talked about, if you didn't happen to get to them in the chat box, you will have that, I'm guessing, either later this evening or first thing in the morning. Dan, I do see a question here, and I think it's a good question. Is there a link?
It is a good question. So
to donate funds?
Let me explain. So this was kind of put together by the Jacksonville Coalition for Equality, which, we are not an actual entity. What we are is a coalition of many different nonprofits, businesses, leaders, organizations that have come together, and we just sit at the same table and we share ideas and work on strategies together. So there's no way to actually donate to the Jacksonville Coalition for Equality, but any of our partnership orgs would gladly, accept donations. That would be JASMYN, PFLAG, Jacksonville, Equality Florida, and any of our other partner organizations that would be willing to help out. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, the Community Fund, the UNF LGBT Resource Center, there are a few really important partners here. So I know that's not like an easy, pithy answer about exactly where to link and give money, but the point of that is that there are several great organizations working on this together, and pick your favorite to support. Who else is out there? Well, we'll get a okay, is there a reason that we're not focusing on the fact this legislation is looking for an issue in schools that does not exist? I think that is a great question, and it is something that everyone can focus on. We, you know, as I write things, I have my own things that I think about, right, and that speak to me as a person. But you're absolutely right, Jody. This is a solution in search of a problem. And if I can just be as cynical as I am for just 1 second and say, all of this is really related to getting our governor up to the next level in his political career. All of this is about Governor DeSantis becoming the president in 2 years. And if that doesn't scare you into action, I don't know what will.
And that, and I'm sorry that I'm can't raise my hand because my screen's, but is that not something that it seems like that message alone, not directed at Governor DeSantis, but just questioning our legislators to tell us what the problem is that this legislation is addressing? I would think you wouldn't be able to get a really good answer from any of them to be able to cite any issues that we've had.
It's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. There's some things you just don't say. Like every legislator knows the game, right? They know what's really going on, but no one says it. There's no reason that you shouldn't say it. If that's the thing that you believe that they need to hear, you might not get a lot of sympathy from some of the legislators, because they'll be like, yeah, we know, that's what we're hoping for. We want President DeSantis. Others will, you know, the ones who probably already agree with us, you know, are more receptive to that level. I think that that's a better message for, personally, I think that's a better message for a letter to the editor, maybe, you know, a social media post, something like that. That's just my thought.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, if you're actually having a conversation with a legislator, you know, about these things, you know, you can always ask them directly. I mean, you're probably not going to get responses to emails or whatever, but you can ask them directly. So why do you think this is a problem? And if they can't actually explain it to you, then it's always fine to go back at them and say, well, here's why I think this legislation is a problem, and here are my reasons, and, you know, just kind of work on it that way. So.
Thank you. That's great.
Sure. Thank you, Jody. Appreciate that. Anyone else want to chat with us for a few minutes? We've got the room until now, or I'm sorry, we have the room for 9 more minutes, and we'll be here as long as you are. Joshua, you're unmuted. Are you trying to talk to us? Guess not.
No.
Someone else? I'm trying to look in the chat as well.
So, you know, just to reflect, I know everybody here, you know, if you're a social media user and you're on, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, be creative, do your own thing, you know, but what I will say, passive posts are less likely to get the attention than if you do active communication. So if you have 10 friends in your network, instead of just posting it on your Facebook and hoping that people will see it, send 10 instant messages to people and say, we really need people to step up and help with this. Would you take 5 minutes of your day to send this email? That's actually going to more likely get a response. Don't overdo it, because Facebook will probably, you know, ban you, but but enough to get the ball rolling. It's always better to do a little bit of a direct ask than a passive one.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I had to remove myself from a location just because it got too noisy. Can everybody hear me?
Sure can, Joshua. Go for it.
So I'm wondering, in regards to these bills, is it impacting private schools as well, or is this targeted towards just public everything?
Well, of course, in Florida, it's just targeted at public schools, and frankly, only public schools that are traditional public schools, not charters and other experimental type schools, and definitely not private not private schools, even those that, of course, receive publicly funded vouchers.
Right. And so, I mean, we'll talk about the elephant in the room, so to speak. You know, some of these bills may have a clandestine strategy if they pass to drive people away from the public schools and into charter schools where they can charge people to attend and make more money, you know, in private schools. That's so there may be other motivators to what's going on that might not be getting talked about.
So can we say that like performing arts schools are excluded from this? Because I graduated from a local high school here, Douglas Anderson. So I'm just kind of curious to see, I think you guys had answered the question that it's not going to impact non-traditional schools.
Douglas Anderson is a Duval County high school. And so it would definitely be impacted by these laws if they were to pass.
Yeah, DA is special. It's a magnet school like other magnets in Duval, but those are traditional public schools, even though they have magnet programs. So DA, La Villa, Stanton, Paxton, I could try to name all 14 or 15, but I'll miss some. Every public school in Duval County is impacted, including DA.
I figured that's hard to process because you know, being able to be myself in that environment is fantastic, and I can't imagine not being able to have that experience.
I can't imagine how many of DA's students will participate in expressing their art, because over the years I've been to Extravaganza and other shows at DA, and the LGBTQIA community is absolutely represented in the mediums, the plays, the composers, all sorts of things. And parenthetically, and I put this in the slide, that you can't tell the history of America or Florida without talking about LGBTQIA people, whether that's Harvey Milk, who was the first elected supervisor in San Francisco, or whether that's Sylvia Rivera and the others who, launched Stonewall, or whether that's the massacre that happened here in Florida at Pulse. It's hard to tell the story of this country without talking about us. So that's a big concern for me as someone who is I graduated from our public schools here, and our history is important. We got just a couple minutes left. Are there any additional questions or thoughts about strategy or how we can do this? And Joshua, your story is very important. I hope you're out there telling it to the legislators. They need to hear from you. Well, we've heard from a student, we've heard from an ally. Is there a parent who might want to reflect for a moment? No pressure. Oh, I'm missing. Let me read the chat. I have been missing questions in the chat. I apologize. Classroom. So this is really, the question that Damien asks is a good one. It has to do with what about extracurricular clubs and such, whether GSAs would be allowed to meet. As far as we know right now, that would not impact something that's extracurricular, although I wouldn't put anything past them. And in terms of badges that teachers, wear with the rainbow or with, various, things letting students know that their classroom is a safe space and they're a safe adult, that could be constrained by this, because it could manifest in one of two ways. But yes, that could be a problem. And if the concern that students have or that parents have is that their student or themselves, if they can't, meet with a safe person at school or to talk to about these issues, that's a big problem for young people. And Allison, I see your question there as well. Dan, we don't know, do we? We don't know how this will be interpreted by school districts.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're already seeing, St. Johns County has interpreted a previously passed law for parental rights in a way that's really, we find a little bit hard to fathom. So because there's not a lot of guidance that will probably come with these laws, each district may interpret it very differently, and they could, conclude that, hey, we can't wear safe space badges because, it might, be considered something related to sexual orientation that's inappropriate or age inappropriate, or under the, the Stop Woke Act, some of those things related to training and diversity and making people feel uncomfortable. I know for a fact there are people who are uncomfortable. We have a mom in Lavilla Middle School who's been complaining to the school board for the last 3 months that she doesn't want to see the rainbow stickers, safe space badges, because it makes her feel uncomfortable, and it's too closely associated with LGBT people, and therefore it's an affront to my religion, and under Stop Woke she could sue,
That's correct. That's the danger, Dan. Trinity makes a very good point. Of course, Trinity Baker, who does a lot of work with GSAs, it says that at this time, all safe space trainings and LGBT guidebook access are on hold. And that's the impact of just having these conversations. Although I'll flip down to what Becky is mentioning, talking about what's happening down in St. Johns County right now. What's happening in St. Johns County is what Dan and I are worried about, and others are worried about will happen in Duval County, where St. Johns County has interpreted the existing Parents' Bill of Rights to mean that they are required to out students who talk to them about wanting to be known by a different name or use a different pronoun or set of pronouns or what have you. So the way that St. Johns County has interpreted the last year's bad bill is that they have to shut that down and out students, which I'll tell you all, in the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill, there was an amendment by the bill sponsor that got a lot of attention this week because he was going to put it in the bill that that schools be required to out the student within 30 days or 6 weeks, something like that. But he pulled that back because there was such a backlash. So what that tells me is that there needs to be a similar backlash by parents and students and educators in St. Johns County to tell their school board, your school board, that it's not appropriate, that's not what the Parents' Bill of Rights says, et cetera. So that's what I can tell you about that. And that's what we're trying to prevent in Duval. Dan alluded to this. Many of us live in Duval. We have students in Duval. We're teachers in Duval. We work in Duval. We're worried that the Duval County School Board may do something similar, although there's no sign that they will yet, but we're staying on top of it. We've technically reached the end of our time. Is there anyone else that wants to say a word or two? And if not, Dan, you can, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And I'm just going to thank everybody. I hope it stopped. There we go.